Before we start today's podcast, I want to ask you a question. What if you could change a life? Key for Life is a charity whose mission is to break the cycle of crime by reducing youth reoffending. Its award-winning 7-step rehabilitation program used both in and out of prisons has been independently evaluated and recognized by the Ministry of Justice Data Lab as one of the most effective models for creating change in this area. Only 14% of participants on the Key for Life program have reoffended 1 year post-release, compared to the national rate of 64%. Key for Life was founded and is run by Eva Hamilton, one of the most extraordinary women I know, who was also my first guest on Bandwidth Conversations. I'm a trustee for the charity and am privileged to mentor a wonderful and talented young man. There are many ways people can help: volunteering, mentoring, providing a work taster, or donating. For more information, please look at www.keyforlife.org.uk, all lowercase. Help change a life. Thank you. Hello and welcome to Bandwidth Conversations, a podcast that finds out about the stories and journeys of artists, performers and rock stars of life. I'm Katie Brewer, and my guest today has been at the top of several professions. He was editor of the News of the World. He was Director of Communications for David Cameron during the 2010 electoral campaign, and also while David Cameron was Prime Minister, he was part of David's inner circle. He founded and now runs Coulson Partners, advising global CEOs, entrepreneurs and philanthropists on crisis management and other strategic matters. Alongside this, he has founded and hosts the brilliant podcast, Crisis What Crisis, one of my all-time favourite podcasts, interviewing people who have had to weather the worst that life can dish out and hearing about how they've coped. He is well qualified to host this podcast, given he has had his own fair share of crisis. His world imploded when he became a resident of HMP Belmarsh and Hoathly Bay, following the phone hacking scandal at the News of the World. I'd love to be able to achieve something Rudyard Kipling wrote in his poem If, and that is, and I quote, "to meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same." I'm looking forward to hearing how my guest treated those impostors, the highs and the lows, the joys and the challenges, what it was like being celebrated, what it was like being condemned. I am beyond excited and really grateful to be talking today to Andy Coulson. Andy, thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be here. And after that intro, perhaps we should just end things there. I will be on my way. Thank you.
Well, you grew up in Wickham in Essex. What kind of a child were you?
Well, I was one of 5 originally, youngest of 5 children. My mum remarried and I have another sister, Emma. So there were 6 of us. I think I was a pretty good kid, if I'm honest. With the work ethic in my family was there through all of us, from mum and dad. And I tried to do my best at school. I did okay.
Did you have a happy time at school?
A happy time? Yeah, I did pretty much. I mean, my mum and dad divorced when I was 11, so that was a tricky time. I stayed with my dad. So he and I became a bit of an odd couple living together, which was actually rather lovely. And I was very clear, though, from a pretty early age that I wanted to get to work. I didn't go to university. That didn't even occur to me. Originally, actually, my plan was to go into the Air Force because my dad was in national service in the Air Force and my oldest brother, Steve, was also in the Air Force. He later became a policeman. And that was what I was going to do, very clear. And so I was an air cadet and I was determined to be the first commissioned officer in my family. And I was on track to do it, actually. I was following a particular path through the air cadets and done some interviews. And then, as often happens in life, I met a girl. Her amazing mum was the secretary on the local newspaper, my local newspaper, the paper, in fact, that I delivered. That was my part-time job, was delivering the Evening Echo. And she said, don't go into the military. And she didn't say, don't go into the military. She said, well, while you're thinking about going into the military, why don't you come and have a look at life in a newspaper? And so I went in and did some work experience. I was 16 at the time, and I just totally fell in love with it. It's funny, it's the smell of it, actually, as much as anything else. It was a newspaper office in the mid-'80s. The printing press was downstairs. You'd batter away at a typewriter. I am that old. You'd see that piece of paper go off to a subs desk, and then you'd see that being taken down, in the end, transformed into this piece of paper that rolls off a printing press that you could go and watch come off the press.
Yeah.
And smell of ink. Clattering machines, the typewriters upstairs sort of rattling on the desk. I'm being far too romantic about this, but it's what it felt like. It's like a film set. And I just thought, no, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do.
So were you writing articles right from the start?
I was very lucky, yeah. I mean, they let me come and do work experience, and I was off. I mean, I can't say they were particularly exciting articles. They were mostly check presentations. But I was out and about like a cub reporter, and I loved it. And I asked them actually to give me a job at 16. I didn't even want to do my A-levels. And the deputy editor of the paper, a guy called Peter Owen, very sadly no longer with us, lovely man, he said, no, you're going to go and finish your A-levels. So I'll be here waiting after. And as long as you get some good grades, then we'll give you a job. And that's exactly what he did. 2 years later, I got a job, and that was that. I was off being trained as a journalist.
Now, I'm not quite sure where this was in the chronology of things, but we have a mutual friend, Tim Chapman, and he might not be such a great friend after you hear what question he has to ask you. But his question to you was, Andy, why were you fired from your first job, he thought, but maybe it wasn't your first job.
Why was I fired from my first job? Oh, he's talking about hospital radio is what he's talking about. Thanks, Tim. Really appreciate that. So I've decided I'm going to be a journalist. A good friend of mine worked on hospital radio, South Essex Hospital broadcasting to the hospitals of Basildon, Billericay and Allsett. Still in me, you see. And he and I had a show together, and Martin had the bonkers idea that we would try. There was a news item about the world's fastest amputation. This is a hospital radio. And so he said, let's try and beat the world record. So we've got a roll of sellotape and a ruler, and we did it. It sounded very good. And then we dropped the sellotape on the ground. And the boss of the hospital radio station was not very impressed. And yeah. And also there were a couple of other incidents where I may have mispronounced some words inappropriately. And that also caused me. And by the way, as has been borne out, that I don't have a natural bent for broadcasting. So yeah, thanks, Tim.
Going back to the Basildon Echo, you were there for 2 years, and then you moved to work for Piers Morgan at The Sun. On
Gary
the show
Bushell, actually. Piers was there. Piers and I were both working for Gary Bushell, who was the Bazaar editor at the time. And then, yeah, Piers became the Bazaar editor, and then I moved over to the news desk. So I've never actually worked for Piers, who, you know, is a very good friend of mine, but I've sort of followed in his wake through a number of jobs, including Bazaar editor.
Okay. How did that whole transition come about?
I was on my local paper. I was doing what's called your indentures, which is like an apprenticeship. As soon as I completed that, I was off to London. I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I went and did some shifts. A friend of mine introduced me actually into the Mirror, first of all, did a few showbiz shifts. I was very clear that I wanted to be a showbiz journalist. On the Echo, they'd very generously allowed me to have my own column that was called Ludicrously Straight Up. And so I was able, because I was getting showbiz stories, I was able to pass some of those stories on to the nationals in the way that you do as a younger reporter. And then I got offered some shifts, and then I got offered a contract, and then they gave me a job. And I mean, my 20s, Katie, were just fantastic. Just so lucky.
So much fun meeting all these people.
Almost sort of perfect way to spend your 20s. I was just flying around the world interviewing famous people, turning left on aeroplanes on the days that newspapers had budgets. They don't do that anymore. And people wanted to talk to you. I absolutely loved it. So I was at The Sun as a reporter for a fair while. The Sun is where I spent most of my career as a journalist. And then I got poached by the Daily Mail. So I went and worked there for a while, again as a showbiz reporter. Actually poached by the guy who's now the managing partner in my business, John Stiefel. And he's reminded me why I then left the Mail is because I was expected to write stories about Terry Wogan and Joan Collins, and that wasn't really
the
where
vibe.
I wanted to be. So rattling forward a bit, Piers then got offered at a very young age the editorship of the News of the World and went and took that job. And then I came in behind him to run Bazaar.
Oh, so I've had a look through YouTube and various bits and pieces, and I've seen you with the Spice Girls, with Rowan Atkinson, with Paul McCartney. Is there a meeting, an encounter, an experience that was particularly memorable from that time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just so lucky. I've met a few of my heroes. Stevie Wonder is one of my heroes.
And
sat with him for hours backstage at a concert in Paris. I've had so many. I've been on tour with the Stones. The Spice Girls and Take That years were in my period of time as a Bazaar editor. So I got to know Robbie very well. And I say proudly, Katie, I broke the story of Robbie leaving Take That.
Did you?
I mean, I laugh about it now. At the time, I tell you, it was huge news. It was huge news. And then I did a deal with Robbie and said, look, obviously he's got an amazing story to tell. So we negotiated that in a hotel room in London, and his terms were there was a certain amount of money that we paid, not inconsiderable, I have to tell you.
Yeah.
But he also said, we're going to do this interview in Barbados. He said, well, I insist we do the interview in Barbados. So we had to buy him a Concorde ticket to Barbados. I then flew out tragically behind him.
Did you get on Concorde as well?
Sadly not, no.
Oh.
And then spent 2 weeks interviewing
Chatting.
him.
That sounds okay.
It sounds all right, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does sound okay.
It's interesting because I'm sure we'll get onto the difficult stuff. But when it all unravels, as it did for me, my newspaper career did not end well. The temptation is to put it all in the bin.
Yes.
Especially when, because of the circumstances of my unraveling, meant that I had to spend years actually reliving it, not in a nice way, if I can put it that way. You put that part of your life into a completely different box and put the lid on it and say, oh, never again. If I'm honest with you, I did for quite a while. I'm sitting here now in front of you, smiling and laughing about my newspaper years. But it's only very recently, it's only in the last 18 months, 2 years, I would say, that, and bear in mind that I came out of prison almost 10 years ago, that I've really been able to say, no, there was some good stuff there. And the days that were great are as valid as the days that were much more difficult. I did some good work. I'm proud of a lot of the work I did during that time. And I don't just mean breaking stories about pop stars, but as a journalist, I did some fantastic interviews and ran some brilliant campaigns as an editor. I'm very proud of all that. But I am also, and I'm sure we'll get onto this, I made a lot of mistakes, pretty seismic ones.
You talk about peers going through the ranks really quickly, and you did the same thing.
I was pretty energetic. I like to think I still am. I certainly try to be. The thing that I was, again, lucky about, but is an opportunity that I definitely seized, was that my time as a journalist, the terms of trade with the world of celebrity and entertainment was changing. There's always been a deal between media and celebrity, obviously. Burton and Taylor were the original Posh and Becks. None of this is new.
Yeah.
But during my time, it absolutely accelerated, that kind of deal making. And I was quite good at it. That's one of the talents I suppose I had, was an ability to sit in front of famous people and say, look, let's make this work for both of us. And yeah, I mean, as a result, we did really well. We broke a lot of big stories and built a lot of good relationships that were mutually beneficial.
You then become editor of News of the World.
I was bazaar editor, and then I got to 30. I met Eloise, who would then become my wife. There was a moment, actually, not long after I'd met Eloise, and I had to cut a date short because I had to go and see the Spice Girls. And I thought, Andy, this is no longer either a good look or a good thing to be doing. So, and I was approaching 30, and I thought, actually, 30 is about the right mark here. I'm going to stop being a showbiz reporter, and I'm going to see whether or not I can be a newspaper executive. And so I had a chat with my boss, and he was in total agreement. And I became number 3 on The Sun for a while, which meant that I was helping to edit the paper. So I was out of showbiz now and into politics and news in its broader sense.
And how did you find that transition?
Well, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Although I hadn't spent much time around politics as a reporter, I spent quite a bit of time around politicians, because one of the things that The Sun was very good at doing is just introducing you, putting you in the room. So I'd had lunches and dinners and whenever because they would come into news to meet all the editors. And as a number 3, I would be in on those lunches. And so you get to see them in action, which is fascinating. I mean, I was always interested in politics. I had my views, but it wasn't my sort of responsibility. And then I found myself editing the paper, and I absolutely loved it. I mean, it's a totally different job to being a reporter because you've got to take so many other things into consideration. But being a bazaar editor, actually, there are a lot of bazaar editors who have ended up as editors. And there's a reason for that, because the bazaar is like a mini newspaper in a way. You've got to run it like a mini newspaper. And that's exactly the skills that you get as a result of doing it. And so, yeah, I was number 3 on The Sun. And then actually, this is when the internet started to explode. I left The Sun of my own volition to go and work on the internet for Rupert, still for news. And I helped build some of the websites there. The Sun's website became currentbun.com. There was an auction site. There's all sorts of madness going on during that .com boom, but I was right in the middle of that for a while. I went off and built a plan for news around a new product, an entertainment website. Very good plan. And I pitched that plan, and they said, Andy, we love that, but we want you to go and work at the News of the World. Not as editor, but as deputy editor. And the truth is, Katie, that was a proper sliding door moment in my life. What I should have done is had the courage to say, no, I'm not going to do that, because I was out of newspapers now and actually loving being out of newspapers. And I was working in a totally different medium. What I should have done is said, no, I'm going to go. Just let me take my plan. That's what I should have done. But these things are very easy in the rearview mirror.
Of course they are.
Very easy in the
rearview
mirror.
And if you have people that you respect asking you to do something else, then it's hard.
And I wasn't being asked to go and wash the dishes. I was being asked to be deputy editor of the News of the World and lovely big salary and this is going to be great. And the sort of unspoken promise is that would be a road towards becoming editor of The Sun. That is the path that I would have been on, which was a job that I would certainly have been excited by. So you can't remake your past. But from this perspective now, there have been one or two of those moments in my life, and that was certainly one of them.
Can you just take us through a day in the life of a newspaper editor?
I only edited, although I edited on occasion The Sun, I was never editor of The Sun. I was editor of the News of the World. So it's a completely different cadence. It's a different working week as well. You start on Tuesday, finish on a Saturday, because obviously you print the paper on a Saturday night. And so the start of the week, actually, Tuesday, Wednesday, to a degree Thursday, what you're doing really is long-term planning. You're dealing with budgets. You're dealing with some fairly dry, boring stuff. You're in a lot of management meetings. During my time as editor, there was a new printing process being installed, which was a huge deal. So literally having to sit in meetings, wondering about deadlines. Sport is very important to the News of the World, football in particular. And so being able to get the right football results into the right part of the country sounds very dull, actually very complicated, in some ways quite interesting, logistical challenge. And then you're running your campaigns. Those are invariably fairly long-term affairs, so you can use the time to develop those. As I mentioned, we did some brilliant campaigning at the News of the World. And so that would involve spending time with politicians. So I'd have lunches, dinners, all that stuff. We had our own awards show that we built called Children's Champions. That would soak up a fair bit of time at the beginning of a week. And then there's hiring and firing to an extent, trying to find talent, trying to keep talent, trying to manage talent. One of the things that I really enjoyed about being an editor is the ability to put together an amazing team of columnists as well as your reporters. So I was the first person to hire William Hague, which I'm pretty proud of. I had John Stevens, the former Met Commissioner. He came in, a very competitive pitch to get him as a columnist. Fraser Nelson, who's now the editor of The Spectator. I loved that talent spotting, developing bit. So that would be your start of the week, if you like, up to maybe Thursday. And then Thursday, your mind starts to sharpen about what we're actually going to put into this thing. And you know, with the News of the World, you've got one chance a week to make your mark and to set the agenda. That's the job of the paper. We did a pretty good job of that. We got some of it horribly wrong as well, which I will talk about. But it's interesting. Again, for a period of my life, I didn't really want to talk about the News of the World because I edited the thing for 4 years. I spent 5 years talking about it. And as I say, not in a positive way. It's like eating a piece of rotten fruit, not to get too descriptive about it. But I really didn't want to go anywhere near it because it ended so badly and it caused so much damage. And the other thing as well, Katie, I would want to say, any conversation about the News of the World, which I'm sure we're going to have, has to start with an apology. And the whole issue of when do you stop apologising, perhaps we should discuss as well.
Well, yes, because that's really interesting.
It is interesting, which I've given a lot of thought to. I did a speech actually recently and someone asked me that question from the floor. It's fascinating. But I think I will always feel that if I'm going to sit, as I am now with you, talking about the News of the World, then it has to start with an apology because I got so much wrong. I will always argue that I didn't break the law. In fact, I think to an extent the law was changed. But that's almost in a way by the by because I got a lot wrong. And there was a lot of things that went on in the News of the World that shouldn't have gone on. There was a lot of harm caused. There was a lot of upset caused. And I'm very sorry about that. Maybe, I don't know, maybe there's someone listening to this who was on the end of that. I don't know. But I think whenever I talk about the News of the World, I don't think I'm going to stop apologising. Apologising for yourself in a broader sense is more interesting. Not more interesting, is a different question.
And what conclusions have you drawn from that?
Being productive is very important to me. And work is very important to me. It's not just important to me, it's important to the people that matter to me. So if you work back from I need to be productive, and if you just look at it from a purely practical point of view, and I think there is a bit of philosophy as well, and we can get into that if you want to, but just from a purely practical, what are my responsibilities and how am I going to move forward? Then you've got to do that in a positive way. And you can't do that if you're constantly carrying the rucksack of the past on your shoulders. So I would never say I've got nothing to apologise for, but I certainly got nothing to apologise for in the way that I have chosen to behave since I dealt with what I had to deal with and the way that I dealt with it. I'm pretty proud of the way I dealt with it, if I'm honest. There are things in my professional past. The truth is there are things in my personal past as well. And those are apologies of an entirely different nature and of a very personal nature. But I think for me, it is about, horrible cliche, I know, but it is just about being able to move forward positively and to be able to contribute. The idea now, which is essentially my working life, is that I can put all of my experience, the good stuff across newspapers and politics and business now, and also the difficult stuff, I put them both to work now, I think, in a pretty productive way. I do it through the podcast, which I love. You and I both share this love of proper conversations on podcasting. And for me, I've now created an archive of over 100 conversations that are just full of useful advice that are free for anyone to go and grab a piece of. I love that. And then in my work, what I've done is try to put all of that experience to good use for my clients. Some of them have been or might be in crisis, but actually most of what I do is trying to help people make the most of their opportunities, perhaps even find opportunity in crisis. But the bulk of our work is trying to help our clients find and build, develop, construct the right reputation for whatever it is they're trying to do with their lives. It's not about fame. That's a completely different thing. It's about reputation with purpose. And I love that. I love the fact that I'm able to put, as I say, my experience to good use.
I love your podcasts, as you know, a huge fan of them. And you have this absolutely brilliant ability to bring grace and empathy to any conversation and make it really easy for people to talk about the worst that's happened to them.
Means a lot.
And maybe you were like that anyway, but I wonder whether having gone through hell, which you did yourself, whether that made that empathy or that ability grow.
It's a very good question. So interviewing was always my favourite bit of the job as a reporter. I loved interviewing, much more, in fact, than I love story getting. Sitting like we are now, having a chat. But this is a different kind of conversation. This isn't an interview, this is a conversation. At least I hope it is.
Yeah.
So I've always loved that. I love sitting with people and hearing their story. That's always been in me. But what has definitely changed, what you're absolutely right about, is my attitude towards the kind of conversation that I want to have. And whether that's more empathy, I'd like to think I was always empathetic, but it's certainly as a result of my own experiences, I am less judgmental, that's for sure. I think I'm more alive to the nuance of life. When you're a newspaper editor, you see things largely, I shouldn't chuck every newspaper editor under the bus here, but you see things in extremes. Everything is black or white.
Yes.
And it's because you have to have an opinion.
Well, that's your job, is to judge, isn't it? And have an opinion.
You've got to take, particularly in the period that I was editing newspapers. And so you spend your time emotionally between two places. It's amazing, or this is appalling, and not a lot of time in between. And what my own experience obviously has taught me is that life is not black and white, largely not black and white. There are some people who sit in those areas, of course, but most of us sit in the grey. There wasn't a lot of appreciation for that in my old job. So there's that. And also my conversations on the pod are not about getting a story. Obviously they were when I was a newspaper man. It's just about getting insight, useful insight that people can then deploy in their own lives. I love it. And I think maybe because I've had a few bumps in the road, I think that gets the conversation to a certain place a bit quicker than it would do otherwise.
Yes.
I love to think, actually, I didn't, my last podcast, it ended with the guest saying to me, "You've got such a lovely, safe space here." I just felt like we talked for an hour
It's
and a half.
almost like a therapy session.
But no, how lovely is that? A huge compliment. So the pod is definitely what it is as a result of some of the things that I've experienced.
Well, let's go to that bump in the road. I'm going to just run through a chronology of events. My understanding is that from November 2005, Prince William had a knee injury, which became a news story. His royal aides complained that their phones had been intercepted. In 2007, Clive Goodman, who was a royal correspondent, and a private investigator, Glenn Mulcair, were sent to prison. And it was at that point that you felt you needed to resign over the whole phone hacking affair, and which you stated you didn't know. In July of the same year, you became the Conservative Party's Director of Communications. So that's a massive shift. So how did it happen that you have this Eton, Oxford educated, presumably risk-averse Conservative, decided to pick you, given the controversy at that point that was surrounding newspapers and yourself?
You'll have to get David Cameron on to ask that question, because that was his decision, not mine. Let's sort of go through that chronology as you've just described it accurately.
Okay.
So 2007, I've been the editor for 4 years. I decided to resign. I was under no pressure to do so, actually. But my simple calculation was, I've got a reporter in prison. There's no way that I can do this job because one very important part of my job is to sit effectively with the leader column of the News of the World and offer views, those black and white views. And I just thought, I can't do that. That's impossible. So I resigned, didn't know what I was going to do, actually. I spent a while wandering around with my dog, scratching my head, thinking, what's next? It's an interesting place to find yourself. And I found myself in that place a few times, or a couple of times at least. Actually, a few times, maybe after hospital radio. But because I am, of course, a resigning recidivist. But I really didn't know what to do. And in the space of a couple of weeks, I found myself in 2 interviews. So I was interviewed for editorship of a newspaper in New York. And I met George Osborne, who actually offered me the job of chief executive of the Conservative Party. It was the first offer. And I thought about both. Eloise and I were quite tempted by going to live in New York, but the kids were quite young, schools, all the rest of it. We were deliberating that. And then this offer from the Conservatives. And I just thought, well, this is fascinating. This is a completely different challenge. I don't want to be chief executive. I don't want to be counting paper clips or organising budgets. I've done enough of that in my life. But I do quite like the idea of being alongside George and David to see whether or not I can help steer this. And I could see some things that I thought I could improve and make a bit of a difference on. And so I sat with them both and I told them what I thought. I've never been afraid of telling people what I think in those circumstances. So I gave them a very unvarnished view. There's some things I thought that they were getting horribly wrong. They were under pretty heavy attack at that point for being posh.
Yes.
And getting a lot of flack, making a few mistakes around it. And I had a very clear view. I don't think anybody cares where you come from. What they care about is, are you any good? So let's concentrate on that. And in fact, let's lean into the fact that you went to Eton. You had an amazing education. Do you know what one looks like? So that's a good thing, not a bad thing. And let's stop worrying about it. They liked the sound of that. Obviously, I had a view on how media works, which they liked. And and then I joined them in opposition. And we had that mad period of kind of going up the hill, down the hill on whether or not an election was going to be called, almost on a rolling 6-month basis. And then into an election in 2010, which was just an amazing experience.
But when they did get into power, there was a lot of feeling of hope around them. You were right there in the inner circle. You were helping shape decisions and helping steer the country. What was it like?
Well, it was fascinating. And I loved it from a professional point of view because I was building my own team. In opposition, we built a fantastic team to win an election. But then, of course, when we came into government, we were in a coalition. Yes. And so the people actually that I'd been across the table from negotiating the TV debates, the Lib Dems, Johnny Oates and Lena Peach, they then became part of my team. And so we had this incredible, unusual situation of trying to bring 2 groups of people who come from totally different angles into one team. And it came to a head, actually. And as we're sitting here in your amazing house overlooking this garden with the sunshine, it reminds me of the moment when we got it sorted. And that was the Rose Garden press conference when David and Nick Clegg stood up together. Yes. It was like a sort of civil ceremony. Do you remember? Yes. And beautiful sunshine, blue skies. It was amazing. And they put on this amazing show of unity, almost finishing each other's sentences. It was lovely. And I'm sat at the back of the Rose Garden watching this and thinking, this is a great piece of work. This has gone brilliantly. And then as soon as the cameras stopped rolling, the 2 camps went into opposite corners of the garden and just started briefing against each other or giving their own version of what had happened. Oh. And this is not going to work. So I brought everybody together in my office and I said, look, guys, we can't do that anymore. I said, you can do that during conference season when it's purely political. And if there are moments when you need to be able to flex your muscles as the Lib Dems and we need to do the same as the Tory, then we'll do that. But otherwise, we're in government. There's too much to do. We are all on the same page and anyone who's not happy with that should say so now. And that worked brilliantly. And we had a fantastic team. We really did. We did a lot of good work. That temptation of looking back on the past and seeing it all through those rose-tinted glasses, I have to be a bit careful about that. But yes, Katie, it was a golden period in British politics. Yeah. No, but it did feel stable. It did. Of something that everyone thought would be utter chaos. Yeah, no, emerged it did something feel really, that was quite reasonable in a way. Yeah, well, if you compare it with how the perception of what's going on now, then it couldn't be more different. But in contrast, it certainly does, yeah. And I think also it's a personality thing. And David's back in government now, of course. He's back as Foreign Secretary. But David was not an ism kind of guy, if I can put it that way. It wasn't about Cameronism ever for him. He's got a very straightforward view of public life and public service. Leave it in a better state than you found it. And that's what he said to me when I was talking to him about first taking the job. And I really like that. I like that pragmatic. Sunlit uplands, I'm not into that really, because I think it's always got a degree in authenticity. So let's leave it better than we found it. Fantastic. That is good work. And I think post David, We lost a bit of that. And it's all become very ego-driven. Politics has always been ego-driven, but even more so. I think it's obviously become very divisive. I think it's also become, frankly, quite incompetent at times. But there's also, having been in the room, I know what it's like to be criticised when you're out of the room. I think there have been moments when I've looked at government being kicked and I've thought, well, actually, you're almost on a hiding to nothing. There's not much. Through COVID, for example, at some periods of time, I felt that. I certainly didn't feel that about the parties, which was mad, and spoke to the sort of culture that had been allowed to build within Number 10 at that point. I think if that had happened on David's watch, I don't believe those things would have happened, because that's not the kind of leader that he was, and it does filter down. But yeah, it's been a crazy period of time for politics since I left it. And I do sometimes wonder, how would I have managed some of those situations? I was out before Brexit, so it's tempting to say that things would have been a little calmer, but who knows?
Each thing that comes along now, whether it's Brexit, COVID, the Middle East, seem to be more and more divisive.
What I want in a leader is someone who is, you're always going to have ego. You need a bit of ego, obviously, to want to do it. But to have a leader who can be reasonable, who can be able, and who isn't a gold-plated narcissist doesn't seem to be much to ask for, I don't think. We have a bit of a lack of that at the moment. And why is that? All sorts of reasons. I mean, the economy obviously plays a part. The way that we've got so much inequality in the world, I think, has driven politics in a particular direction. Even if you look at something like immigration, whatever your views of immigration, it drags everything off into a certain, not even to the right in pure political terms, but it just drags people into an environment that has a much higher temperature.
Yes.
And once you're in that place, then the decision-making changes. And so that ability to stand back, be reasonable, be calm, be able, becomes so much more difficult. And so that attracts a certain type of leader. And that's why I think we've got a lot of the people that we've got in play at the moment. I can't sit here and say that things would have been different if I'd been involved. The one thing I think I'm confident of, because this is my natural instinct, particularly at times of crisis, my natural instinct is to try to find a way to suck the drama out rather than increase the drama. So I'm pretty confident that I would have, if I were in some of those rooms, my instinct, and I think a lot of my work would have been geared towards sucking drama out. And you can do that in some very basic ways. It can be about the words that you use and the words that our politicians use now. If you use the word crisis inappropriately, then you're going to make it worse.
Get one.
Is at its simplest. And I just think that we're in a place now where the commentary is just in the wrong place. There's not a lot of room for reasonableness at the moment in politics. Going
back to you, you were there in government until 2011, when you then resigned. When you resigned again. Phone hacking came back again in 2009 with a Guardian article saying that the News of the World journalists had been involved in widespread phone hacking, so it was more than had been originally thought. And I guess this rumbled on or snowballed. Had you felt when you moved to government that was a line had been drawn underneath it?
I felt that I'd paid a price for what happened at the News of the World and resigned. And I felt I had a right to get on with my life and get on with a career. I felt that the job that I was doing, still feel that the job that I did in politics, I did well. No one's ever tried to level any complaint against the way that I did the job, either in opposition or in government. And I felt like I was doing something of real meaning. I was absolutely loving it and it was incredibly rewarding. But the story did come back and I was there to look after the communications primarily. I was involved in some other things, but primarily my job was to look after communications. And when I found myself all over the newspapers again, it was just impossible. It was just completely untenable. And as I said in my resignation statement, and the spokesman needs a spokesman, it's a bit of a clue that it's time to move on. And so I resigned again. I wasn't asked to. There was no internal pressure to do so. In fact, they tried to dissuade me from leaving, but I was very clear, I can't do the job and I'm of no use if I'm spending my time managing my own issues. So I left, and yes, you're right, a few months later, it was about 5-6 months later, I actually started a business as soon as I left. I started a small consultancy business and had some interesting work underway. But then it all came back, and then what followed was arrests. Had a number of those, and then a very, very long process that led eventually to a court case. But I had 3 issues to deal with, more than 3, but they were packaged as 3. One, I was acquitted eventually. One, the case was dropped eventually. And the other, I was convicted. I tried to make my case. I gave evidence over a long, long period of time at the Old Bailey, but the jury decided otherwise. And although I'll never agree with that, I've accepted it, and I tried to accept it and deal with it when obviously the consequence of that came, which was going to prison.
And I'm particularly interested in the trial that you faced because I'm a trustee of this charity, Key for Life, that helps rehabilitate young offenders and help them find work. And I mentor this young man who I actually saw on Wednesday in Belmarsh, and he is in prison for joint enterprise murder, which I 100% don't think he did, but he's there. But I remember going to the Old Bailey when he was being tried. We all felt pretty confident that he was going to have to go through this trial and it would be fine. On the day that he was giving evidence, just everything unraveled. The prosecution was more experienced, more aggressive. His defense barrister just kept quiet. Over the course of a day, we went from feeling really confident to, wow, he's going to be convicted of this. How was that whole process for you?
It was a slow-moving car crash in a way, and then suddenly it's a very dramatic day or a dramatic email or a series of dramatics. I left Downing Street January 2011. I didn't get to trial until towards the end of 2013. And so in between times, I had arrests. I had knocks on the door at 6 o'clock in the morning, put in the back of a van, driven to Scotland.
Driven to Scotland?
Yes. I mean, that was a significant day for me, which was May 2012. I'd already been arrested in terms of the intercepting communications here. And then knocking on the door at 6 o'clock in the morning, I went downstairs and a street load of policemen, earpieces in their ears and blacked out vans. It was ridiculous. It was like a scene from Men in Black or something. They were from Scotland and they said, "We're here to arrest you and you're coming with us." And I sort of naively asked what time's the flight. And they said, "No, we're driving."
We're driving.
They were perfectly civilized about it. Although I didn't much like them coming into my house and scaring the life out of the kids. And I got back out of a van.
And you're not given any warning about any of this?
No warning. I didn't know this was coming. This is all related to a trial that I gave evidence in. And so the charge was perjury. They're accusing me of lying in someone else's trial, which I absolutely denied and dealt with eventually. But it took years. Yeah, driven to Scotland, put in a cell that was sort of built for terrorists with one-way glass. And I remember that moment because that, in a way, was the moment when I surrendered control. I didn't give up because they're very different things, surrendering control and giving up. But I did sit on this. I just thought my life has now become utterly absurd. I'm sat on this blue mattress. I just simply have lost control of my life. And so what I'm going to concentrate on, what I realized in that moment is that although I've lost control of what's going to happen next, I've still got, the one thing I've got is total control over how I deal with this and how it makes me feel and what I'm going to do by way of reaction to it. And that was a proper moment for me because up until then, I think I'd been in full-on crisis mode, running around like a madman trying to whack these moles that kept popping up. And I just thought, this is now out of my control. Let's just focus on how you're going to manage it for yourself and, frankly, more importantly, for your family. So that was the moment, really. That was the turning point for me. When you think the speed of it, that was, 24 months, sat there on a blue plastic mattress in a police cell in Scotland. 24 months earlier, I've been sat on a Marine One helicopter next to the President of the United States being asked my opinion. Life can be extraordinary.
Yes.
That does demonstrate, if you like, this very literal, I suppose, highs and lows of where my life took me. But from that moment, I changed my mindset completely and I thought, we just got to deal with this. And then if you fast forward to the next, I suppose, difficult moment, I've been convicted. I had a brief period of time between conviction and sentence, which I was very thankful for because it allowed me to spend some time with Eloise and the kids and to prepare myself and prepare them. And then before you know it, you're in the back of a police van being taken off to Belmarsh, a place you know well, straight out of central casting, isn't it? And
it is.
First night in prison, you're allowed to make a phone call. My lawyer rang me actually and said, look, we thought that this mad Scottish situation that had developed, which was just ridiculous, would go away with my conviction in London. There was a theory that that would happen, and it didn't happen. The Scottish prosecutors put a statement out and said, we are absolutely going to be continuing with the next trial. And so most people who arrive in prison
think it's over. Well, not over, it's over, but the unknowing is over.
They kind of can see the door. The door might be a long way away, but they can see the door. For most people, not everybody in prison, obviously. But yeah, I didn't have that. In that moment, I knew that as soon as I came out of this situation, I'd be straight into another with potentially far more serious consequences as well. And that was a difficult moment. And that was a difficult conversation with Eloise. But she was, as she has been throughout all of these dramas, she's just so more evolved than me, frankly. And her reaction to me was, look, life is long. Just get through it. We'll be fine.
And
Just
when
keep
did
going.
that issue in Scotland go away?
Not until I came out. So I served my sentence, 2 months in Belmarsh. Should only have been there for a few days, but I was there for 2 months, which is no one's idea of fun.
And I'm going to just stop you because I looked up the definition of Category A prisoners, which Belmarsh houses, and they are those whose escape would be highly dangerous to the public or the police or the security of the state, and for whom the aim must be to make escape impossible. That's definitely you, Andy.
Interesting. I've never heard that.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd tick that box.
No, you definitely don't.
No, they kept putting me to the bottom of the pile, is the truth. It's interesting. One of my very recent podcast guests was my fellow Belmarshian, Jonathan Aiken. We did wonder whether or not we should get some ties made, but that's probably in bad taste. But he had exactly the same experience as me. And he kept being put to the bottom of the pile and served not quite as long as I did, but too long in Belmarsh. And I think it's also partly dysfunction and everything else. I was quite angry about it at the time, but Belmarsh was going through a difficult period, if I can be generous. And then the rest of the sentence in Hoseley Bay, which was a completely different experience, and in many ways fascinating.
And in Belmarsh, were you scared? I'm
Very
always
anxious.
very grateful I get to
it's
meet.
the unknown, isn't it? But
Yeah.
I did a lot of research before I went in, some of which was useful, some of which turned out to be utterly useless because you've been in and around prisons. The regime changes swiftly. It can change on a spin of a coin. Suddenly you're allowed something that you're not allowed, or and vice versa. So I took in a load of books, couldn't have them, couldn't have my stamps, couldn't have a radio, certain items of clothing. They said, no, you can't have any of that when I've been told you absolutely could. So just on a practical level. Even in Belmarsh, Hoseley Bay was more interesting because I was working that productivity thing again. I had a purpose.
And what kind of things were you doing?
I was an education assistant, basically, because Hoseley Bay is a resettlement prison. So there's people at the end of very, very long sentences. If you've murdered someone and finished your sentence, you'll finish your sentence in a prison like Hoseley Bay. And so having conversations with those guys about what's next, they're doing Dragon's Den presentations, doing CV prep, how are you going to manage your job interview, the whole issue of do I tell, not necessarily if you'd murdered someone, you've got no choice, but if you've got a lower level crime, do I have an obligation to tell people where I've been and what I've done, which is a very interesting area of debate in the justice system, as you know. I found all that fascinating, really interesting way to spend a day. And I just focused on that, and the days went quicker as a result. Belmarsh was a harder slog because it was
And how did you spend your days?
Well, most of it behind the door, to be honest. It was a pretty broken system at the time, Belmarsh. They were between governors. And so they just kept us locked up, 22 hours, 23 hours on some days.
Were you on your own in the cell?
No, I was with 2 other people. And then a battered telly, which I was very grateful for. Far too much daytime telly. More homes under the hammer than is healthy for any individual, I can tell you. And what I did do, though, is spend some time thinking.
Yeah.
But I spent some time thinking about how do we get more positive content in the prisons.
One of my questions was, what works and doesn't work in prisons?
Yeah, well, we need more positive content. If you're going to put someone behind a door, at least make sure that they can access something that might be useful in some way. So the podcast is my little mission on that, and we're making a bit of progress. But I didn't have any trouble at all directed at me. A bit of joshing, a lot of, if something wasn't working, the excuse would be, well, Tory cuts, isn't it, Andy? Which was funny at least the first 10 times.
Yeah. Is that because of the way that you behave? Is it possible to go through prison for everyone and not get into trouble?
There's no guaranteed route to safety or success in prison.
Okay.
And then there are 2 routes, I think, to things getting properly difficult, dangerous even for you. One is to get yourself in debt, and not just financially, but there's a lot of do this for me and I'll do that for you in prison. Right. Stay out of that lane as much as you possibly can. And I had a lot of offers in that regard, and I turned them all away, which is a difficult thing to do.
Yes.
When you're stuck in a prison. I managed that bit reasonably well. And then the second bit, you've got no control over anyway, and that's random violence. You're walking down a landing, the bloke coming the other way has just been told, maybe lost his court case, maybe something's happened at home or whatever, and he thinks the answer to his problem that day is to wrap a pool ball around someone's head. You can't do anything about that. You keep yourself alive to it, so you're constantly vigilant.
Yes.
But you can't actually do anything about that. And then there's just a dose of luck, big dose of luck. And I think I managed myself pretty well in prison, but I think I was probably also quite lucky. Hoseley Bay is completely different. That's a prison run on trust. It's an open prison. It's a totally different regime. The prison officers are of a completely different state of mind. They're doing a different kind of job. And obviously the prisoners themselves are all got a different state of mind. So it's a much more constructive place to be.
So what would you do if you could become prisons minister?
There's an interesting idea. Because I'm content focused, I'd love to find some ways of getting more positive content into prisons. I've got some projects running in the background that aren't finished by any means, so I can't talk about them yet, that I hope will play a small part in that challenge. There are much bigger questions around our criminal justice system and our approach to prisons. I say this as someone who edited a red top newspaper with particular views of justice, I suppose. Although I think actually I was even then quite interested in innovative ways of rehabilitation. And of course I worked in politics for a party that had a particular view on law and order. But again, David, actually pretty liberal when it comes to some of the issues around prisons. So that's the context in the background. And I'm obviously now someone who's been in prison. If I were to boil it down to one big picture observation, we have far too many people in prison. We put far too many people in prison. And I do not say that saying that I shouldn't have been. I mean, I shouldn't have been because I don't think I was guilty of a crime. But having been found guilty, I always knew that they would send me to prison. Of course they were going to send me to prison because it was so public and so political. But I think we put far too many people in prison. Prison should be for people who are dangerous or who have committed a crime. The definition that you just gave there is not really far off. In my time in Belmarsh, you mentioned joint enterprise. There were a tremendous amount of young men who were there on joint enterprise charges, either on remand or post-conviction. Very lengthy sentences. I spent my time walking around the yard on the occasions that we were let out, chatting to young men who were going to be spending the next 30 years of their life in prison. That's an interesting conversation on one level. It's also desperately sad on another.
I have this young man who I go and see, and he's facing 27 years. How do you survive? How do you get up every day and feel hopeful?
It's interesting. I would ask that question to a number of people who are on very, very long sentences. And the common theme was always family, always family. For those that were towards the end of their sentence, because I also spent a lot of time talking to people who'd served 25 years and were now pondering their future, those conversations, some of the family bit had just fallen apart completely.
Which you also understand.
Which you also understand because that's just how it will work for some people. And those conversations are much more about purpose. What am I going to do? I need a job. I want to work. I want something constructive in my life. But for the guys that are pondering the beginning of their sentence, their primary concern is just family. And prisons are very, as you know, you've been in them, they are very stark, cold places. But they are also, even Belmarsh, full of emotion. And although a lot of people spend their time trying to hide that, the interesting thing for me was when you get the opportunity to ring your family, you invariably find yourself in a queue. Honestly, every time it came to my turn to get the phone and the bloke who was ahead of me turned around, almost every time, that person would have tears in his eyes. Because he's spoken to his family and he's either had bad news or he's spoken to his kid. They're full of emotions, prison. And humour as well, by the way, which is a very good crisis technique or attribute, I should say. Massively
critical.
Undervalued. Massively undervalued. The strategic power of a bloody good laugh.
Yeah.
But no, for that reason, I found prison mostly mind-numbingly boring, but on occasions quite fascinating and on occasions rewarding.
After 5 months, you were home.
Yep, I was put on a tag and was on curfew for another 5 months, which is no walk in the park, by the way. I mean, literally, it's not a walk in the park. You can't walk in the park.
You have to be home the whole time.
Yeah, I was on a curfew, yeah. And I nearly missed a couple of times.
Like house arrest?
Well, it wasn't a house arrest. You were allowed out. I was allowed to go and work.
Oh, okay.
But I had to be back home by 7 o'clock in the evening. I wasn't allowed in my own garden, which seemed a bit mad.
Yeah, that does seem mad.
It's quite restrictive. It's not nothing. It often gets described by people like I used to be in newspapers. Oh, he's only served 5 months of his 18 months. He's been let out early for good behaviour. It's nonsense. It's none of those things. It's the system. And the system, it's one of the good things that we have is that a certain type of prisoner can come out and have a tag on their ankle and can start to find a way to contribute. I was actually spending most of my time preparing for the next trial. 5 months on tag, I came off the tag and then went straight into a trial in Edinburgh, which meant that I had to move to Scotland for a while. And then
How long were you up there?
I was up there for a few months. And then the trial, which fortunately ended well and I was acquitted. But that whole process that I'd gone through at the Old Bailey, I was doing again in the High Court in Edinburgh. potentially with much more serious consequences. But I was acquitted. And then that was the moment that I could really start to see a future again. And that was a great day. And since then,
What was the date?
It was in May 2015.
Okay.
And since then, I've just been, right, we're off. I had two choices, actually, Katie, is the truth of it. After a period of time of just trying to work out what on earth is out there for me, because I'd become unemployable, I'd become pretty toxic.
Even though you've served your time.
I don't blame people for this. People take a view. People are largely focused on themselves and what they've got going on in their lives. The idea that people were suddenly going to fall over themselves to make things easy for me, I didn't expect that. Although those moments are a big audit on your life, I'm very, very lucky. There have been a few people that I expected to stick with me, if you like, who didn't.
Yes.
That's for them. But I've had far, far more people, an army of people who owe me nothing, who ran towards me and have been supportive and have helped me just kind of find a way, either with something as simple as let's go out for lunch through to let's see if we can do some business together and everything in between. I'm so lucky to have had that. And yeah, I had two choices really. Go and write the book, become even more bloody notorious, tour the TV studios, tell all my stories, kick a load of shins, which is just not who I am. It was an option.
Sure, there are people wanting you to do that.
I could have earned some money that way, but it's not who I wanted to be at all. What I wanted to see is whether or not I could turn all this into something useful and commercial, but useful ultimately, and make that my life and see if I could build a business. That's exactly what I did. And it was a longer, slower road, but I've absolutely loved it.
You set up Coulson Partners, and that was only a year later that you set that up?
Yeah, originally the business was called Coulson Chapel because I was in partnership with a great guy called Henry Chappell. And then we parted company very amicably because I wanted to change the focus of the business. And Coulson Partners has now been operating for 7 years. In fact, we've got a 7-year anniversary drinks this week. Yeah, and it will be 10 years in, what's interesting, Katie, it's only occurred to me a couple of weeks ago. It will be 10 years on July the 4th, Independence Day, ironically enough, that I was sent to prison. In November will be obviously the 10th anniversary of my coming out. So yeah, it's been a decade. But I love my work. I'm very lucky, as I say, to be doing what I'm doing with the people that I'm doing it with. Got a brilliant team of people, some brilliant clients who entrust their reputation to me, which is a privilege. Also, if they're in difficulty, some of our clients either have been or are, to sit in a room with someone who's facing that kind of difficulty, because I've been that person.
Yes.
And to be able to offer the advice in the way that I now can is wonderful. And yeah, life is very good.
What's the biggest change, do you think, in you?
I've changed in lots of ways. I think I'm still the same person, but my views have changed for sure. I always hesitate when I start thinking about this question, because you can end up in a world of cliche, but they're cliche for a good reason, I suppose. I definitely spent too much of my life pre-crisis either saying to myself or saying out loud, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And I don't do that anymore. My little device, which is terribly cheesy, I know, is I just say to myself, no, you get to do this, you get to do that. And when you've had your life taken away from you, or your ability to be productive taken away from you, that is... I still get a wonderful feeling when I realize, when I've got something that I know in my previous life I would have thought, oh God, it's a bit of a pain. How amazing that I'm now able just to try and get in and try and unwrap and solve that problem, even if it's something a bit mundane or a bit difficult. I see that as wonderful. Like I say, it's a horrible cliche. It's a bit of a bumper sticker.
No, but it's an important one.
It's a device. It really is a device for me. I stop myself. If ever I catch myself saying, oh, God, I've got to do this, I make myself say, I get to do this.
Yeah. I have just watched Scoop, the television
Sam McAllister.
thing. Yeah. And
I haven't seen it, but I do know Sam a little. She's a force of nature.
Yes, well, and she's certainly portrayed that way. And for those who haven't seen it, it's the Prince Andrew interview with Emily Maitlis and how it doesn't go how he would like it to have gone.
That's an understatement.
I wasn't quite sure how to say it. But if he had come to Coulson Partners now...
That's a very unlikely scenario, I can tell you.
But what would you have advised him to do?
Well, I can be because I'm also quite fortunate in that I know Emily a bit as well. And She's a brilliant journalist, a brilliant interviewer. And for that reason, I'd have said, do not in a million years go anywhere near an interview with Emily Malis.
Okay.
That's not disrespectful to Emily. That's actually paying her a great tribute. Yes. She's a proper journalist, as is Sam, by the way. You did an amazing job with that interview. But no, that's not something I would have advised in a million years.
Well, alongside Coulson Partners, your Crisis, What Crisis podcast is just wonderful. And you've talked to how many now? Amazing guests?
Over 100. We've done over 100 episodes now, yeah.
Wow. What comes up time and time again in your podcast that can help people who are in a crisis of any kind?
Actually, the common theme through almost every episode, not every episode, but almost every episode is that control point. Is just focus on what you have control of and appreciate alongside that you have total control over how you are going to react in those difficult moments. And we've had that through so many different stories. I'll give you one example. A woman called Claire Danson, who was a triathlete, is still an athlete, and I'll explain the story. She's preparing for a very important competition, I think, in Turkey. She rides her bike out of her house in her village, turns a corner that she'd turned 1,000 times and rides straight into the back of a tractor trailer and breaks pretty much every bone in her body, several breaks in her neck, arms, her lungs are punctured. Most significantly, spinal cord is snapped essentially, and she's paralyzed from the chest down. By sheer chance, the first person on the scene was a medic and was able to do what needed to be done to keep her alive long enough to get the air ambulance. She goes to hospital. Family are told that she's most likely going to die. She doesn't. So there's something inbuilt in her that got her through whatever that darkness was. But then she's in a hospital bed with her sister, and she learns between her and her sister, who are very close. Sister's a quite a well-known sports person as well. She's a hockey player. She can't speak, she can't move, but she can just move, squeeze her hand. And so they develop a system of communication between the two of them. And so Claire's able to squeeze out an alphabet, and she's lying there. Her life is ruined. Everything that she was, she no longer is physically, is how she would put it. And from the midst of all this crisis, she squeezes out the word para-athlete. So even in that circumstances, she is identifying the opportunity that she can see in the midst of this unbelievable trauma. The state of mind that gets you to that point. And she's squeezing out because she wanted to make sure they got the right surgeon, because she wanted a surgeon who could repair her arms sufficiently so she could use the wheelchair. This is in the immediate days after this happened, and the strength of mind. And she has now gone on to be a very successful para-athlete and may well be taking part in the Paris Olympics. So it's incredible. So to sit with someone and hear that story and be able to just ask questions in and around that is just a horrible cliche, but what a privilege. And so that opportunity in crisis is also definitely a theme that's come through.
4 more quick questions. Today, what is your most important daily habit?
Cold shower.
Really? I had one this morning.
Me too.
Very good. And why do you do that?
I started doing it a while ago, and it's just a brilliant start to the day. And I definitely think it's given me more energy. The whole cold water thing, definitely given me more energy. And I've got it fixed as a habit.
Okay. What's a quality that you don't have that you'd most like to have?
Oh, a stronger exercise ethic.
Okay. What would you tell a 20-year-old Andy Coulson?
A number of things. You're a lucky bugger. You're going to meet this woman called Eloise. You're going to have these 3 fantastic kids and make the most of it all. I think I would also tell him, be more courageous. Life is very long, but it's also incredibly short. It's both of those things. And I alluded to it earlier with those sliding doors. I wish I'd had the courage earlier in my life to back myself. I wish I'd gone into business a lot earlier than I did. So back yourself for sure.
And last one, who would you most like to have dinner with and where would you take them?
Is this a kind of a live or
Can
dead?
Be anyone,
yeah.
Dead, live or dead.
I've been very lucky, as we touched on earlier.
Yeah, you've
I've met a few of my heroes, and I've
people.
met a lot of really interesting people. I've met a lot of presidents. I've met a lot of world leaders. But there are a few people who I've met that didn't have the opportunity to have a proper conversation with. So Margaret Thatcher, for example, a number of times. In fact, I gave her a bit of a tour of Downing Street when she came back in, which is a wonderful thing to have done. But that was towards the end of her life. I would love to have had a dinner with Margaret Thatcher in her prime. Would have been terrifying and fascinating. And where would I do it? That's all easy for me. I'm a creature of habit. I've been going to Dean Street Townhouse for as long as it's been open. I was there last night with two of my sons and my godson and his two brothers. An amazing night, lovely people. It's like a second home.
Great. Thank you so much for today. Before we go, I just wanted to mention that in George Osborne's diary in The Spectator, it was 3 weeks ago, I think, 30th of March 2024, talking about new ownership of The Spectator and The Telegraph, he said, "I am, as a rule, very sceptical of people who see establishment stitch-ups around every corner. But all these years later, I still feel angry that it was my friend Andy Coulson who was singled out as a scapegoat and sent to Belmarsh, while the politicians and the proprietors never stopped schmoozing each other." And then Tim Chapman, our mutual friend, when I asked him to describe you in a sentence, he said, "Loyal, great fun, engaging, honourable. I always look forward to spending time with him." So I have been really looking forward to spending time with you today, and I have so enjoyed chatting to you. So thank you so, so much, Andy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for those words as well. It means an awful lot.
You've been listening to Bandwidth Conversations. Thanks to Anna B., Head of Marketing, to all of the podcast consultant, to Bagawire for the music, to the Money Maze podcast. Thank you for listening. Any feedback, please email me, katie@bandwidthconversations.com. Please sign up on our website, www.bandwidthconversations.com, so we can notify you about new podcast releases. We hope to see you again soon.